I'd like to, this time up front, acknowledge my co-authors, Jeremy Boswell and Ian Gidley from Thurber. And I must admit that I'm approaching this discussion with some trepidation. And there's some reasons for that. I got to say that hopefully you're going to hear something, as the Monty Python guy said, completely different. Different in the sense that we're not going to talk so much about technical items, and different in the sense that I'm going to ask you to take off the blinkers, slow down, and do a little bit of self-evaluation. You know, engineers are predisposed to being optimistic, and this normally serves us well. In fact, you saw a really good example of that this morning. We almost had a love in here for the first half of the day. And I don't say that in a disparaging way. I say it in a kind way because I'm part of it. However, any skill that we have can be taken to an excess. And when we take things to an excess, we find out that skills have a dark side to them. And as an example of that, I would say that embedded in our psyche as engineers is the idea that with sufficient ideas and resources, we can solve any problem that confronts us. And we heard that. In fact, that was one of Andrea's closing remarks this morning. This is a seductive idea that, as human history has shown us, century after century and millennium after millennium, it's not true. All you have to do, if you want an interesting trip, take a tour around the Mediterranean and look at the evidence of all the failed civilizations and find out why they failed. And as an engineer, and you'll get an appreciation that those people 4,000 years ago were just as good engineers as we are nowadays. But you'll get also a strong feeling that we need to beware of excessive pride in our business. So, with that sobering opening thought, let's see where it leads. For over 40 years, the oil sand industry has been challenged to solve the fluid fine tailings problem. David Carrier at lunchtime today told us that we're kind of slow off the mark, which is probably true. We've had some minor victories. Now, I characterize our progress a little bit differently than some of the other speakers. We've had some minor victories, but we've had many setbacks, and the war is far from being won. So, it's not our proposition that it's an impossible problem to solve. I think that it is a possible problem to solve. But it has proved so far to be very intractable. That is, very stubborn. So, as authors of this paper, we felt it would really be valuable to propose some questions that would help each one of us as individuals and organizations to evaluate whether we have our engineering blinkers on, and if so, what should we do about it? We're going to sort of, where we went was to a place where other people have had similar problems in medium and large scales. And there's a really good book out that was published about 15 years ago by Thomas Homer Dixon called The Ingenuity Gap. It should be required reading at all universities for all engineers. And what do we mean by an ingenuity gap? We mean that situation where the right set of ideas and resources cannot be brought to bear to solve a particular problem in a required or reasonable time frame and at a reasonable cost. And one of the first points Homer Dixon makes in his book is that our supply of ingenuity involves both the generation of good ideas and their implementation. So there's no sense somebody holding up a beaker and saying, I've got the solution to the oil sands tailings problem. It doesn't work that way, as we've come to learn over and over again in our own business. So but I guess with a little bit of assistance from Homer Dixon, and certainly doing some kind of blue skying ourselves, we've come up with a list of questions that we are posing, and we're not going to give you answers to them. The value of good questions is to make you think and make you come up with some of your own answers and draw some of your own conclusions. So this paper has 17 questions in it. What we hope is that after you've read through them, that you'll sincerely and honestly look within yourselves, within your organization, your institutions, our political system, and evaluate why we have an ingenuity gap in oil sands tailings. And we have it. There's no doubt that it's there. And I guess we should also at the same time ask that question about whether we are, in fact, going to get to an end solution, and if so, how. So this was an interesting process for us, because after we'd written all the questions down, we kind of grouped them into 5 categories. And we just picked the categories sort of randomly: technical, social, political, financial, and philosophical. You know, there was only 4 questions that were technical, that involved technical items. And there were 12 questions that involved what we were calling social. And social is basically everything that doesn't fit into the other groupings there. So it's not just dealing with stakeholders and people in society. It's dealing with our organizations and institutions and how we manage ourselves within companies, and how and to some extent how we interact with the government and with the regulators. It seems that the weight of the ingenuity gap, based on this kind of straw poll, is in the social area and in the political area, and not in the technical area. So we asked a small group of industry experts to tell us which of these questions resonated with them. It just started off with us sending the paper out to a few people that we thought would be interested in it, and then later on we thought we'd take advantage of that and ask them, what do they really think? So they kind of focused in on 7 of our 17 questions. It doesn't mean that those 7 were any more important than any of the others, but for the purposes of the presentation here, we're only going to talk about 4 of them. All of those 7 questions were categorized as social, political, or financial. There was not one on there that was technical. So where are we putting all our effort? We've talked about it for the last day and a half, and we'll continue to talk about all the technical aspects of the ingenuity problem. But I would propose to you that that's not where we should be putting the majority of our thoughts and effort. So we need to understand that social ingenuity is a key prerequisite to technical ingenuity. One of our questions was, is our focus on the need for technical ingenuity actually getting in the way of making progress? It could be hampering or even harming our progress. By the way, I could find a Dilbert cartoon for every one of these points. That tells you something about how deeply Dilbert has dived into the engineering psyche. Question 9 in our paper was, are existing incentives to supply ingenuity to solve the problem, are they appropriate and effective? And there's incentives within companies and incentives that companies offer outside to suppliers. I think if we really buy into the idea that with sufficient raw materials and ideas we can solve any problem, we're already suffering. We're already getting ourselves ready for a fall. So in any case, we should be looking at the source of the incentives that we provide, and that also that comes from the government to the industry. Question 11, how well do our scientific and engineering institutions function? What are the nature of our research facilities? What is the discipline used in carrying out research? What are the procedures for funding and peer reviewing research? I think we've heard some of the qualities of some of these institutions extolled today. I would suggest that they deserve a hard look as well. I particularly like Wally's comment in this one. So the new rule is that we write stuff down. This is one for Heather. You can use this anytime you want, Heather. Question 13, are we significantly open-minded about what constitutes an acceptable solution to the fluid fine tailings dewatering problem? I suspect that we've been way too narrow-minded about it. And we've decided what other groups want from us as operators. And we've decided what the government wants. We've decided what the native people want. We've decided what other stakeholders want. Have we really had an open discussion that allows everybody to understand the difficulties of doing whatever we have to do and buying in to what are acceptable end scenarios? This is a theme that Gord McKenna likes to bring up and is right on the money with it. So where are we going? I don't know if you know this term, deus ex machina. It's a reference to the old Greek plays where they used to make the plays so complicated and convoluted that when you got to the end of the play, the only way you could end it was to invoke some god to come in and sort everything out for you. So that's deus ex machina. Now, we don't have that option. There is no god that's going to come in and sort out the tailings engineering problem. So a quote from Henry Ford, this is always a good one to keep in mind. Coming together is a beginning, keeping together is progress, working together is success. Now we're trying to apply that mantra. You've heard from COSIA the things that they're doing to apply that mantra. So I'm not saying there's no effort in this regard, but maybe the group that we're thinking about is too small. Maybe we need to enlarge our ideas of who should be coming together. So we didn't want to go to the situation where we just asked a bunch of questions and didn't give you any ideas for consideration. So we had 3 in here. They're not particularly in any order of importance. They may not even be important in the big scheme of things at all. In fact, in some ways they concentrate too much on the technical stuff and not enough on the social. But anyways, financial incentives. We certainly have a massive opportunity and economic incentive to do better. We also have a huge threat. The point I wanted to make on this is I think we spend way too much time and effort and money on fine-tuning things that we know aren't going to work very well, no matter how much time we spend on them. And there seems to be a really heavy-duty roadblock in advancing new technologies, ones that are in the gate or about to come into the gate, to move them forward and get them proved out or off the table. And I can probably name 10 of these for you right now that have been stalled in the gate for the last 5 years, ever since the Tailings roadmap came out and even before. So one of the potential solutions for that, because this is what's always brought up as one of the roadblocks, is you can't go to the pilot scale because nobody has a place to put it, and they can't supply the materials and everything else. So why don't we start thinking about a long-term test facility? It's got to be on somebody's lease because we need a continuous supply of MFT, sand, whatever else we need in the process. And it needs to be in a place that has longevity, that isn't going to be mined out or covered in waste 2 years down the road. So just an idea to float. If our immediate reaction is we can't do this, it's impossible, you've already put the blinkers back on. I don't want you to do that, right? The last one is a little bit different. We think that we should continue on from the Tailings roadmap and go into a social organizational roadmap, one in which we can critique our organizations and our regulatory system and relationships and the way that we collaborate maybe too narrowly. If you read Homer Dixon's book, this idea comes across over and over and over again, that if you really want to fully unlock ingenuity, you got to involve everybody in the game, and not just those people who stand to benefit from it directly. So we're going to show you something here in just a second. This is my closing comment. This is John F. Kennedy giving a talk to Congress way back when I was probably 6 or 7 years old. I don't know the exact date on this. But to me, this is an example of how ingenuity was encouraged from the top down. The U.S. had a committee of the Congress under the Vice President at the time, Johnson, who studied this particular issue and came forward with a recommendation that Kennedy was tasked in selling to the Congress. Now this is about sending a man to the moon, but I want you to just listen to what he's saying and suspend the man to the moon stuff and think about it in terms of solving the tailings technology problem.
These are extraordinary times, and we face an extraordinary challenge. Our strength as well as our convictions have imposed upon this nation the role of leader in freedom's cause. Now going on around the world between freedom and tyranny, the dramatic achievements in space which occurred in recent weeks should have made clear to us all, as did the Sputnik in 1957, the impact of this adventure on the minds of men everywhere who are attempting to make a determination of which road they should take. Since early in my term, our efforts in space have been under review. With the advice of the Vice President, who is Chairman of the National Space Council, we have examined where we are strong and where we are not, where we may succeed and where we may not. Now it is time to take longer strides, time for a great new American enterprise, time for this nation to take a clearly leading role in space achievement, which in many ways may hold the key to our future on Earth. I believe we possess all the resources and talents necessary, but the facts of the matter are that we have never made the national decisions or marshaled the national resources required for such leadership. We have never specified long-range goals on an urgent time schedule or managed our resources and our time so as to ensure their fulfillment. I therefore ask the Congress, above and beyond the increases I have earlier requested for space activities, to provide the funds which are needed to meet the following national goals. First, I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. No single space project in this period will be more impressive to mankind or more important for the long-range exploration of space, and none will be so difficult or expensive to accomplish.
Now there is a political leader you could get behind, because he clearly enunciated where everybody was going to head, and he gave them reasons for doing it. Can you imagine what would happen if Jim Prentice got up and gave a talk like that in Alberta about solving the oil sands tailings problem? I don't know if it'll happen or not. Most of our politicians recently, and I make no comment on Mr. Prentice because I don't know him at all, but most of our recent politicians have not taken that step. They've been kind of wishy-washy and made certain comments about how we were going to meet commitments with no idea of how we were going to get there. Kennedy didn't make that talk until he was thoroughly briefed by the committee, the Congress committee, and by all the technical experts that gave information to that committee. So I believe we need stronger, higher level leadership in this endeavor that we're about. And I don't mean necessarily from the upper levels of different operating companies. I think it needs to come from higher than that. I think we need some strong political leadership. We need strong political support for the regulator so that the regulator isn't left hanging. And I think we need to somehow marshal all of the resources that we have, social, technical, financial, political, whatever else, to bring an end to this problem, to bring a conclusion to the problem. Now, there's the list of all the 17 questions. I'd encourage you to go and read them all and read the discussion that goes with them. And see if it doesn't tweak in your own mind some things, right? And just get the blinkers off for a while, get off the love-in machine, you know, start applying what you know about the reality of this business, and see if you can come up with some ideas of how we can tap into the real ingenuity that we have in the business and in the province. Thank you.